You are listening to Talking Star Wars.
Hello, everyone. I'm Alex,
And I'm Connor,
and today we're going to talk about Star Wars.
as we do from time to time. And today we have an installment that we haven't returned to for a while, and it is our fifth installment of the novel Spotlight. I probably didn't title that right, but we're going to talk about some books in the expanded universe today.
As everyone listening is probably aware, the current canon of Star Wars has almost 100 novels in it. I have been working through reading all of them, and if anyone else would like to join me, you are free to. Otherwise, this is intended to survey them in chunks so you can digest which novels you find most interesting, and otherwise learn those key facts that the novel provides and the importance it provides in the setting and the world of Star Wars as a whole.
And we'll let you know whether or not, this is for an average fan, a particular Star Wars fan. I will see if these books tickle my fancy, for I have not read them, so I will be on just from the point of view of the dunce cap. I prefer more the brick wall to bounce ideas off of.
Yes, and
This is
so
where you say you should give me more credit, but it's
uh,
fine, it's fine.
Connor, our friendship is built on honesty and trust.
As you were saying.
So for each of these novels, I'm going to provide an overview of the plot and the key aspects that people might find interesting. I will talk about it as a work of independent fiction, its quality, and who I think what the target audience might be for. And then I'll talk about its importance to the Star Wars universe as a whole if you're looking to get a greater understanding of the setting. For those who might be looking at a list of like release date, as we were discussing these by release date, the last one we talked about back in episode 24 was Rebel Rising, and we are going to begin this episode on our timeline of release order at Inferno Squad.
And I appreciate how each of these books kind of are released in a phase that's meant to build toward a certain film that's coming out. A certain era is highlighted at each point, and really, I think the main reason why we're going through this is because these books remain in steadfast canon, unlike the pre-Disney Legends books. Some are great, some are not, but they're all kind of at a lower standard compared to the movies. Here, everything counts. There might be some comic books that are uh, maybe disagreed with later down the line, but by and large, these, stand as stalwart in canon as much as, Luke learning that Vader's his father.
Yes, so we definitely enjoy when the novels are both referenced in other media and themselves reference each other. So it paints the world of Star Wars as this larger tapestry. All that
Supplemental media done right.
correct, yeah. Sometimes Dave Filoni is not as respectful of what other people have done with the characters he sees as his, but that's a conversation for another time. Um, so I think with that said, we're going to go ahead and get started with the first novel we have on here, and that is, as I said, the novel Inferno Squad.
And so we have a tie-in here, as you were saying in our conversations before. This is a direct tie-in to the video game Battlefront 2, from the much maligned Battlefront series, as you can learn from our previous episode on video games and our opinions of them.
Yeah, but the highlight of Battlefront 2 for me was the campaign, which
Mm.
I had played through, telling the story of a special operations squad of Imperials attempting to hunt down the rebels after the destruction of the second Death Star, leading up to Operation Cinder. So this novel is a tie-in to Inferno Squad present in Battlefront 2 and is the prequel. It is how Inferno Squad was formed in reaction to the destruction of the first Death Star, and then the first mission that they are assigned to where they have to go undercover. So written by Christy Golden, Inferno Squad, the main character is Commander Eden Versio, also the protagonist of the Star Wars Battlefront 2 campaign, and it is the series of other experts that she is assigned to or gathers around herself for her mission, which is to stop the remnants of Saw Gerrera's partisans, those who survived the destruction of Jeddah, as depicted in Rogue One, who are going through a series of assassinations of Imperial figures all across the galaxy. At a time when the Empire is reeling from the destruction of the first Death Star, this sign of vulnerability is not taken well, and so Versio's Eden Versio's mission is to infiltrate this group, find where they're finding their information, and then eliminate them.
I imagine we don't see many of the partisans because by the time Rogue One is over, there aren't many recognizable ones left. I mean, Saw Gerrera, played by Forrest Whitaker, is long gone, so I'm guessing this is mostly from the perspective of Eden.
No, there's still a whole cell of the partisans left. They call themselves the
Ah,
Dreamers. It is those who were off
hmm.
planet when Jeddah was done. Because Saw Gerrera did have bases spread across the galaxy.
Oh, sure.
His core leadership and himself obviously were killed in the destruction of Jeddah City, but there were still many who survived, and they have become even more extremist than the partisans in the time between. So
Naturally.
so the novel follows our group of Inferno Squad soldiers as they infiltrate the rebel cell. They have an elaborate stage story, fake credentials made because once they identify, the base of the Dreamers, they could call in reinforcements and kill them at any time. But the Dreamers have detailed Imperial intelligence about where certain officials are going to be at certain times to carry out their assassinations. And so stopping that information leak is considered more important than stopping a few assassinations. So even though they could in a time destroy the Dreamers, Eden and her group remain undercover, trying to earn everyone's trust while looking to betray them once they find out where they're getting their information from. And then if you intend to read the novel, spoilers in the next 10 seconds, but we get a returning character from the Clone Wars. It turns out the source of their information is a former separatist senator turned Imperial sympathizer turned potential rebel, Lux Bonteri, who goes by the name of the Mentor in this novel, who, due to his family connections, has the locations of all of these Imperial events that the Dreamers are using for their targets.
Sounds like he's definitely grown up since his time in the Clone Wars show, where he was just the potential love interest of Ahsoka Tano.
Yeah, he's an older man now. He's probably one of the oldest people in the novel. He is, and he does not necessarily agree with the extremist tactics of the Dreamers, but after the destruction, and he even talks about how he thought the Empire was much better than the Republic, and so he was loyal to the Empire up until the destruction of Alderaan. In which case, he then his old separatist ties came back to him, and he reawakened that part of himself and joined this rebel cell with the information that he had. So, and it is for anyone who's played the Battlefront 2 game, you know that Eden Versio eventually realizes that the once Operation Cinder is carried out, that the Empire's death throes are no longer loyal to her, and she leaves to join the rebellion. And you start to see the cracks in her facade in this novel, where she does not necessarily agree with some of the extremist actions taken by her Inferno Squad compatriots, even though she herself kills quite a few people in this novel in the name of the Empire.
Interesting. So, in considering this book as a whole, as a tie-in to this Battlefront 2 game, I don't know if we've discussed many game tie-ins before. We've talked about the overall quality of a piece of media and then how it stands as a piece of Star Wars. Uh, but how do you feel this fits in with Battlefront 2, and is it necessary reading to get the full scope of the game?
I would say if you intend to play the Battlefront 2 campaign, this is a good one. It will give you more of the characters, and you will because you get good characterization for about two of the main characters in Battlefront 2. But if you want to know about the whole squad and why they fracture down the lines they do, this novel sets that up. If you liked the character of Lux Bonteri in the Clone Wars and want to see how his story continues in the Imperial era, this does that as well, and it has lots of continuity. Uh, Lux Bonteri was, of course, fought on Andoraan and was close with Stila, Saw Gerrera's sister, and Saw Gerrera himself. So we get more of that relationship and how he mourns the death of Saw, and we get all through the eyes of an Imperial who doesn't have any loyalty to anyone on a personal level, and her mission is to destroy these individuals that she has to pretend to be close to and live alongside for months.
So great, sounds like a great way just to fill out the video game and further bolster the Battlefront series. And it sounds like Battlefront 2 did such a better job in uh, catering to and serving the fans of Star Wars. It's I have my complaints with the first game. So how does this book stand as a piece of media and as a piece of Star Wars media?
So, as a piece of Star Wars media, this one I would say, does fill in some gaps about it ties into Battlefront 2 in a good way. It gives characterization to existing characters. It expands upon those extremist groups after and the rebel cells after the destruction of the first Death Star, and explains how, oh, we blew up the Death Star. There's this big celebration at the end of A New Hope, but then Episode 5 rolls around and the rebels are hiding on Hoth, frantically fleeing from Darth Vader. We see the gears of the Imperial war machine turning. So if you want a little bit more of that, to see those Imperial gears turning, to see how officers are identified and assigned missions. And then again, this is a spy thriller, spec ops commando story. You don't have any Jedi or Sith appearing anywhere in the novel, as it ties into a game about squad tactics. So, as a piece of Star Wars media, it's not one of my on my absolutely essential lists, but it is a solid one and will expand your knowledge of the Star Wars universe.
Sure. As an overall book, kind of a I don't know, Jack Reacher, Sam Clancy spy type.
Yeah, as an independent novel, I would say it's solid. It's I wouldn't say that anyone who doesn't know these characters or is vested in Star Wars would get a ton out of it. But the writing is solid. The characters are good. The imagery is pretty vivid. So as a work, it is solid, but it is more of a character and plot study than like a thrilling exploration of complex themes, other than perhaps the constructions of loyalty and the lingering effects of war, even many decades later.
Sure. So kind of a not bad, higher mid tier type piece, leading us into a pretty solid video game.
Yeah, I would say that that is accurate.
All right. So what do we have to look at next?
So after Inferno Squad, the next novel we're going to discuss is Leia, Princess of Alderaan.
So who's this geared towards? I know we've had some young adult stories. Majority of these are just your standard novels. What are we looking at here?
Yeah, so Leia, Princess of Alderaan is a YA novel focusing on Leia, and the novel starts on the day of her 16th birthday. So she is at the time, and still remains, but is the child of Breha and Bail Organa of Alderaan. It goes through her ritual to be accepted as heir to the Alderaanian throne, as well as becoming an adult. And goes through and her realizing that her parents are involved in the nascent rebellion, but are trying to shield her from it. So she goes through, she tries to rescue people from plague and destruction, and is stonewalled by Imperials. She joins the Young Legislative Committee, which is for the Imperial Senate, which is largely powerless at this point. She falls in love for the first time with a boyfriend who does not obviously survive the novel.
I don't know why I find that humorous, but I mean, tragic, but yeah, this is 3 years before A New Hope, so we've got to kind of pave way for uh, brighter and scruffier looking things.
Yes, so the primary thrust of this novel is, yeah, Leia's our viewpoint character, and so we see the galaxy immediately preceding the full outbreak of hostilities between the Rebel Alliance and the Empire, sort of through her eyes. And her parents try to hide, as I said, the rebellion. And we meet her friend Amy Lynn Holdo, who becomes Vice Admiral Holdo in the time of the Resistance, and as well as a rebel officer during the time of the rebellion.
Is her hair still pink?
Her hair is ever changing.
Ah.
So she is mentioned to have a sort of eccentric sense of style that continues throughout all of her appearances in the expanded media.
Sure.
For Amy Lynn Holdo. So this sort of ties together Leia's childhood, but then shows her trajectory towards becoming a rebel leader, the one that we know starting in A New Hope and especially into The Empire Strikes Back.
So this could very well be I consider this to be an important part of time for Leia. She's one of my favorite characters in Star Wars. I don't know if I've ever said that in the this podcast here, but just her resilience, her ambition, her service towards all things justice and good, and not letting anyone talk down to her is fantastic. So, seeing that journey is something that I would put a lot of value on. Does this book serve that kind of gap that we have in media as it stands?
Yes, this is certainly showing how Leia becomes, I wouldn't use the word radicalized, but committed to the rebel cause, almost against the objections of her parents, and that they hide things from her, but then she figures it out herself, and they have to bring her into the fold because she will not be denied any longer. I mean, she tracks Bail Organa, her father, to one of his hidden rebel bases, and in the novel, which happens to be on Crate, so uh, ends up causing some drama there. Her boyfriend remains loyal to the Imperials and is convinced she's being framed for being part of the rebellion and desperately tries to convince her not to join and tries to come save her from some rebels when in fact that results in his own death. And then the book also details, if you liked Mon Mothma in Andor, this shows Mon Mothma as a supporting character in the later stages of the rebellion after she is in deep with Bail Organa. And it also shows that Tarkin is onto them. He comes and crashes a party at
Hmm.
one point, and Bail Organa is barely able to deflect. He has several other rebel aligned senators, over to uh, his palace in Alderaan, and this shows again Tarkin pushing to dissolve the Imperial Senate because he technically is not able to do anything to senators and sovereign rulers of planets, but he is still powerful and dangerous.
You will end up doing great damage to planets themselves. Um, so, sounds like this might be a YA novel that I might actually be interested in reading. So, how would you say this stands against just the lens of young adult novels that we've discussed on the podcast so far?
Yeah, I mean, I always like any novel written by Claudia Gray. She also wrote Bloodline,
Mm.
which was the other novel exploring Leia in her 50s. So this is Leia at 16 to 17 years old. So if you want, Claudia Gray does a great Leia. Um, Both her experiences as like a teenage girl coming of age and with all the expectations and responsibilities being put on her as a princess and a ruler of a planet, and also her drive to become involved in the Rebel Alliance while trying not to be caught by the Empire, and then battling young love, young disappointment. So all of those things that you see present in a YA novel, but through the lens of Star Wars, and that in 3 years' time she's going to be, blasting stormtroopers and giving plans to R2D2 to carry to Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Can you believe that Carrie Fisher? I think she was only 19. I could be wrong. She might have been 20, but uh, just cannot believe that she turned in that performance so young. But kudos to her. So, this book, as it stands as a piece of Star Wars media and media as a whole, sounds like it gets the top marks.
Yeah, this is definitely one of my favorite, YA novels of Star Wars, and explores a character I enjoy very much. I would also say it ties in very well with other media. This explains why Leia shows up in an episode of Star Wars Rebels as already doing rebel work for Bail Organa at the age of 17. This novel leads right up to that mission, um, and also shows why she might have complicated feelings about love and relationships, and how she feels this great weight of responsibility. It has a sort of beyond her age gravitas to her. So as a piece of Star Wars fiction, it's not really telling you anything that you didn't already know. Leia becomes a rebel leader.
Mm.
She is young, and she then takes on the responsibility. But if you want to feel the weight of the tragedy that she feels when Alderaan is destroyed, if you want to see more see more of Alderaan before it's destroyed, if you like Bail Organa and want to know more about Leia's adoptive mother, go ahead and give this a read. And it also gives more world building details about the ending days of the Imperial Senate and how they put on a show to try to show that they are maintaining control, but then also the first sign of Tarkin just wanting to dissolve them so that Moffs could govern the galaxy directly.
Sounds excellent. This will definitely go on the list.
Yeah, so I would rate it as a a good, if not vital, novel in Star Wars canon, but a very well written novel on a character level. And anyone who likes Star Wars would enjoy this book.
Fantastic. So, what are we taking a look at next?
So after Leia, Princess of Alderaan, we are now looking at Phasma.
And we talked a little bit about this book in our uh, we had a missed opportunities episode on Phasma where I think we delved into this a bit
Yes,
as one
this
of our earlier episodes.
Yes, if you'd like to know more about Captain Phasma, as she is known, you should go ahead and look at episode 7 of Missed Opportunities about Captain Phasma. And from this novel is where I drew a lot of my information about the directions they could have taken Phasma's character.
Because she was essentially from a barbarian warrior type culture, if I am recalling correctly, and sort of indoctrinated into this First Order just out of the sake of survival.
Yeah, so Phasma is our first of our novels that was released in the lead up to the release of The Last Jedi, where Phasma is one of the secondary antagonists in the movie.
She's one of the toys.
Yeah, does not have a particular character arc there, even though this book tries to give her one. But Phasma is one of my favorite Star Wars novels at all because it is not told through Phasma's perspective. She is the driving force of the novel, but this is a kind of grueling post-apocalyptic Star Wars novel where is set on a dying planet that has gone through some environmental catastrophe way back in the days of the Republic, and there's just tiny populations left in the planet eking out survival with the few pieces of technology that they still have available. Has evolved into sort of different tribes, mostly human with some other species lingering around, and the planet is actively dying. I mean, there's radiation everywhere. People get sick. There's few ways to survive, and you can think of in 100 years that this planet might just be a wasteland with no one remaining. And that is where Captain Phasma was born, just known as Phasma at the time. She is the head warrior and second in command of her tribe when Brendel Hux, the father of Armitage Hux, he of fascist speech to the First Order and the Force Awakens fame, crash lands on the planet with a few of his stormtroopers, and right next to Phasma's tribe. And so he makes a deal with Phasma, is like, hey, get me to my ship, which crashed a few hundred kilometers away, and my escape pod landed here, so that I can send a transmission to the First Order to get me back, and you will be rewarded. Set on the planet of Parnassus, the main character's name is Civ, who is one of Phasma's fellow tribespeople, who just witnesses Phasma's actions through the entire book. And if you're expecting sort of this tragic backstory for Phasma about why she is how she is, you don't really. Yes, she had a hard upbringing, but she betrays everyone she comes across in this novel in succession. Everyone around her is a tool, and you see that through the eyes of all the people she betrays. Just in her relentless need to get off this planet and then to achieve power. And this whole novel is also through the framing device of an interrogation being held between Captain Cardinal, Captain Phasma's counterpart in training the stormtroopers, and V. Maradi, a resistance spy who is trying to find information on Phasma, or has found information on Phasma, is trying to get it back to the resistance when she is captured. So you also have these interludes between Captain Cardinal, who is pretty brutally interrogating her, but just because he thinks he has to save his own position, and V. Maradi, who's trying to turn him to the resistance while also eking out her information about his rival, Captain Phasma.
Interesting. Uh, for fans of Star Trek The Next Generation, if you're familiar with Season 1 character Tasha Yar, very similar upbringing to Phasma, kind of similar personality of just someone who kind of escapes, joins an elite military organization, becomes a security officer through more heroic of a lens, and is dispatched as gracelessly as Phasma was in the first season. Little Star Trek tangent in our Star Wars conversation.
Yeah, so I would say that the two primary points of value in this novel. One, it's very well written. It is fairly brutal, and it is really the first time I've seen a post-apocalyptic sort of flavor to a Star Wars novel.
Which we don't get. That's what it brought to mind Star Trek too, because that's a utopia and there's this hellish landscape this person comes from. But to see that in Star Wars is like even more so than just the poverty that the galaxy is left in during the Empire and their reign, having something that is post-apocalyptic and just deadly is an interesting landscape for the universe.
Yeah, so if you're interested in sort of that genre crossover of seeing like, oh, what happens when things break down and there's no longer, we have the used technology future in Star Wars, but this is where the ability to produce more technology is completely broken down, and there's no passage of knowledge from one person to another. All of the standard technology that we expect is rare or absent, and it's this slog for survival across a death planet. That's Parnassus, and that's where Captain Phasma grew up.
Mhm.
We also learned some other interesting details, such as how her armor itself was made from one of Palpatine's star yachts. That was what Brendel Hux was flying in when he was shot down, sort of as a flex. So she then comes back in after murdering Brendel Hux, because of course Phasma murders Brendel Hux for his son, Armitage Hux, so that Armitage can seize power. Uh,
And is that ship that her armor was made from the same exact ship as one of Padme's, or just from the same planet?
it's just from the same planet, so
Okay,
it's not exactly Padme Amidala's, but it belonged to Palpatine.
sure.
You will see one of these yachts depicted in the Lando comic if you ever want to read that. Palpatine had a series of them, and uh,
Unsurprisingly, he seems like he owns many yachts. He's a rich white, so
well, but he also used them to house secret Sith artifacts, as we know. This one did
ah,
not, but as like a sign of the favor from the now dead Palpatine, Brendel Hux flew around in this Naboo produced uh, chrome star yacht,
mhm.
which then was shot down, and Phasma used it to make her armor. And she sort of does a Mandalorian thing similar, not for the same reason. Her tribe she comes from had a habit of wearing war masks during battle, but Phasma is unique in that she rarely takes it off, and no one knows what her face looks like. And in fact, she murders everyone who ever knows what she really looks like. And she never takes her helmet off when she's in the First Order.
Mhm.
When one of the stormtroopers dies in the novel, she takes on wearing his armor, and she never takes the helmet off. So whether that's because she needs to hide her own face and lose herself in that identity, or whether she just doesn't want anyone to actually know what she looks like, but she is even more reticent for anyone to see her face than Din Djarin is.
And in her few lines, you can see how she enforces that, and her exchanges with Finn, wanting to make sure that he keeps his helmet on, and that gives us a pretty big glimpse into the First Order and how they want to dehumanize its stormtroopers as much as possible, and not really acknowledge the fact that they might have emotions that don't coincide with the First Order's mission. So that's kind of representative of this book as a whole, it seems. It takes this character who seems pretty flat in its film adaptation, or its in her film representation, and fleshes her out to be an actual character and someone who I'm proud to have an action figure for. Not that I need to be proud of a character to have an action figure of them. They could just look cool, but she's gone from looking cool to representing an interesting character who could return. I wouldn't mind seeing that.
Yeah, so anyone who wants to read this novel, I'd also recommend reading the companion comic series Captain Phasma, which explains her actions and covering up how she's the one who lowered the shields on Starkiller Base. Because again, Captain's Phasma's priority is Phasma at all times, even if she pretends it's the First Order. And I believe this is one reason she is so she needs to destroy Finn in the time of the Last Jedi, because one, he threatens her position, and two, he's escaped sort of the conditioning and programming that she's tried to put into people, and she can't have anyone questioning her role and authority. It's not particularly nuanced. I would have preferred more about
Mhm.
from her upbringing, but it just ties into Phasma's character of constantly betraying those underneath her, above her, beside her, to try to survive and better her own position.
So seems like again very much as a Star Wars media representation, very strong, very helpful in fleshing out this character. And as one of your favorite pieces of Star Wars media, how does it stand as a just general book as itself?
Yeah, as a piece of Star Wars media, as I said, it's not 100% essential, but it is also goes in detail with through the character of Captain Cardinal, the indoctrination program of the stormtroopers, how they are abducted and molded into stormtroopers, under the tutelage of Cardinal and Phasma. And you see how the Resistance, spies and gathers information as well. And then you can see what happens when there's the utter breakdown of law, order, and technology on a Star Wars planet. How it can quickly devolve into a sort of subsistence survival like setting, including things like cannibalism,
Hmm.
and there's lots of cannibalism on the planet Phasma's from Parnassus.
Interesting.
Yeah, and this reminds me of the scene from Andor
Hmm.
where there was some kind of disaster that killed all the adults, and we just have all this tribe of children surviving on this mining planet.
Hmm.
So Phasma survived in a similar situation and became who she was. As a standalone novel, this is one of the few Star Wars novels that I actually recommend, like for a general sci-fi audience. Like you don't necessarily even need to have a particular Star Wars background to enjoy a framing device that then shows the flashbacks for a particular character. And Phasma is not so important, and her actions in The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi are not so vital that you cannot enjoy the novel, even if you're not invested in
Hmm.
what happens in that book. You can just see this is a terrible person who manages to succeed at the expense of everyone around her, and the one survivor who manages to not fall victim to Phasma's machinations.
So pretty darn high praise. I don't think I've heard you give a book this high praise since, was it Lost Stars?
Yes, Delilah Dawson, along with Claudia Gray, one of my favorite Star Wars authors. Delilah Dawson also wrote Galaxy's Edge Black Spire, which is a novel we'll get to, and that I also highly enjoy.
Awesome. So definitely a high mark quality if they have further media that the Star Wars machine has asked them back to contribute. So excellent. Two high quality works back to back. Let's see if that shall be maintained after a commercial break.
We don't have commercials, Connor.
Star Wars. I think we're promoting Star Wars.
Well,
Um,
yes, we're putting Star Wars all the time.
by Star Wars. So now back from our commercial break. What's our next tale?
So this one I'll talk about briefly because it's not truly a novel, but there are a series of three short story collections called From a Certain Point of View. The first one came out, if you're gonna be looking at my release order list, the same one I am, you'll see From a Certain Point of View. The first one came out here. I'm just gonna touch on this very briefly. So they are each a collection of like 40-ish short stories of various canonicity, some of which are intended to be comedic, some of which are tragic, some of which expand upon the universe, most of which are intended to be read sort of just as fun. Like we get a detailed backstory for the bartender from the Moss Eisley Cantina, a Clone Wars veteran, and why he hates droids.
No droids here.
Yeah, we get the detailed backstory of the monster in the trash compactor and the planet it was abducted from, and how it recognizes Luke's destiny and then lets him go, hoping that he can bring balance to the Force. Um, we get a potential queer love story between Grand Moff Tarkin and a repair technician and stormtrooper, told through the logs found in a mouse droid.
Interesting. Interesting. This seems like a cross between the Animatrix and Chicken Soup for the Soul.
A little bit, yeah. So it's funny, it's tragic, it's sad. It does little bits of world building. It's all enjoyable. Um,
Not necessarily crucial to lore and canon, I take.
there's a few stories in each one that are like obvious, like here are our canon stories. Like we
Hmm.
get an interesting one in the Empire Strikes Back one where it's from Yoda's perspective. It's actually from the perspective of the dark side entity that is in the cave in Dagobah,
Hmm.
and Yoda chatting with it. And it thinks that they're a big rivalry, and Yoda's just very grateful that it helps challenge the dark side presence of himself and Luke. So
Oh, sure. And gives him someone to talk to on the planet when Luke's not around.
yes, so there are a few like, oh yes, this fits easily into canon, and some you're like, this is unnecessary character expansion. Do we really need an entire chapter or an entire short story about Lando Calrissian's chef and how she was uncertain how to prepare a meal for Darth Vader without being killed?
That
It's
sounds awesome.
Yeah, and how she needs to escape with her Ugnaught best friend from Cloud City after things go to hell.
It seems very much how we would describe the Star Wars Vision animated series, where it's some humorous, some very much with stoic characters, but all of it creative, interesting. Some of it canonically fits well. Some of it definitely probably doesn't. Um, yeah, when are the other two collections released?
Yep. So, from a certain point of view, The Empire Strikes Back was released in 2020, and then the Return of the Jedi version, each was released on the 40th year anniversary of the 40 stories of the original movies. So, Return of the Jedi was released this year in 2023.
Point. So in 2039, we'll get the Phantom Menace installment of a certain point of view.
Yeah, we will see. But yeah, if you want to have some bite-sized Star Wars content, um, that's digestible and written by a very wide range of writers in a very wide range of styles, um, go right ahead. You will get things such as "But what does he eat?" about the chef trying to prepare a meal for Darth Vader,
Mm.
to "No Time for Poetry" from the perspective of Dengar in IG-88 as they pursue the Millennium Falcon. To you even get one from the perspective of the medical droid that reattaches Luke's hand.
I think I remember reading some young adult book where they talked about how Darth Vader drank, and he had a straw, and it like kind of just fit through his mask.
Yeah, I don't think that's how it works in the current
Yeah,
canon.
I think there are tubes involved. Like it's probably fed like RoboCop, but interesting. Just some fun. Just some Star Wars fun.
Some of the stories are honestly hard to get through because they're so far out there. Some are really compelling.
Mhm.
So, if you want to get a really wide range of Star Wars, go ahead and read these. But I would not say that they are essential for your understanding of anything in the Star Wars universe. As independent short stories, they're really, they're very deliberately and by design are fairly insular. They are not meant to be read in the vacuum of I can read this short story knowing nothing about Star Wars.
Mhm.
It is certainly operating within the space of this is a Star Wars short story. It has Star Wars in jokes. There's jokes about Gungans. There's jokes about Han shooting first. There's
Mhm.
references to Star Wars media on a meta level in many of these stories. So uh, it definitely, if you like are immersing yourself as I have in Star Wars media, you will get all the jokes. But if you have less than 100% complete knowledge of all Star Wars, some of it might be a little bit like, what did that even mean?
That's fair. So not on your general audience level, but some fun for Star Wars fans.
Yeah, generally, if you saw the original, it would almost be interesting to read alongside watching the film and
Oh
like
sure.
that little random character on the screen for 3 seconds has a whole short story. And I think and part of it they realize that there's this tendency in Star Wars to give detailed backstories to every character on
Yeah.
screen for 3 seconds. So some of these stories play into that. Like, yeah, we gave a really tragic, badass backstory to this guy carrying this white, canister down the corridor in Bespin.
I mean, they before this in Legends they made R4D5 or whatever droid exploded, and has since been brought back in the Mandalorian
Oh
from.
yeah, he gets a short story
Yeah,
in the first one. He's not force sensitive anymore.
right.
However, he does R2D2 does tell him about his mission, and he agrees to help R2D2, and that's why he blows his motivator.
Which I mean, it works. I like the force sensitive droid. That's
Yeah,
just me.
it's a little bit just so for me, like a
Hmm.
little bit like let's wrap it all up. All this was planned from the beginning. It's filling in gaps that don't necessarily need to be filled in.
Right.
Sometimes Star Wars is best when it is mysterious.
Hmm.
But then you get like some really interesting artistic stuff. Like we get an entire story from the perspective of the Exogorth, the giant space worm that tries to devour Han and Leia. Did we need one from that perspective to learn that they have a billion-year galactic life cycle and they tend to devour life forms to keep them alive inside themselves? We did not. Is it interesting that we got one? Sure. And that actually becomes canonical when we get to another comic about Luke getting trapped inside another Exogorth later on when he is a Jedi.
I would imagine that story is made up of a dozen words, and half of them are hungry.
Oh no, it is sentient and has very detailed philosophical thoughts as it drifts for millennia through the galaxy.
Only some of them involve hunger,
They feed on like cosmic radiation. I don't know, but
as you do as a space worm.
it gets made fun of by the other space worms. It's very sad.
Oh, poor thing. Anywho,
All right,
so
so
fun times. Our next story, I
yes,
imagine, is a story and not a farce, spoof, satire.
yeah. So moving on from a certain point of view short story collections, we now come to our next novel, which is The Legends of Luke Skywalker, which is the first of three works that were released as the lead up to The Last Jedi, expanding upon one about Luke Skywalker, one about Canto Bight, and one about Rose Tico and her sister, Paige. So we will do the first one first, which is The Legends of Luke Skywalker. So this is fun for me. The execution is a little iffy.
Mhm.
So um, I am not like 100% sold on all parts of it, but I love the concept. This is a bunch of kids, young adults, in a
Ah.
freighter going to Canto Bight, the one of the settings of The Last Jedi, and talking about all the stories they've heard about Luke Skywalker, the legends, because he's a famous galactic figure at this point, but no one really knows the true story because he's reclusive. He's on his Jedi Academy. He doesn't feel the need to set the record straight for anybody. So there's all these wild rumors about him, especially given the rise of the First Order. People are like, what is Luke Skywalker up to? So we get a series of stories about Luke told from a variety of perspectives, and they're all told by unreliable narrators of various times, secondhand through other storytellers in the bowels of this cargo ship. And it is fascinating. It is a self-reflective internal mythology told in Star Wars.
Mhm.
And while I'm not in love with every story, I love the concept
Mhm.
of just doing that for someone like Luke, because Luke needed the characterization, and we need to see his impact on the galaxy. And this, The Legends of Luke Skywalker, do that.
I remember learning in college that if you really want to make your fantasy rich, give your characters a fantasy in your fantasy. Give them a mythology. Give them legends to believe in. And by the sounds of it, this isn't just accomplishing that, but it's also mythologizing this character who we still really haven't seen at this point in media. Like at the release point of this book, we saw Luke on a mountain, very upset that someone brought his lightsaber back. So to have a piece of fiction that is delving into the what the fans are feeling, they're anticipating what Luke has been up to. Also need to add that this is a direct. There's got to be some direct influence from two pieces of Batman media because there's a episode of the animated series where three kids are talking about their adventures with Batman, but one of them is in the classic 50s and illustrated style of Dick Sprang, and the other one is a Frank Miller future Batman story. And then in the Batman uh, series of short films, kind of like the Animatrix, called Gotham Knights, so it came out between Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. We have three kids telling their stories about their interactions with Batman, but in one he's a big flying demon, and the other he's a robot, and it's just these different sort of interpretations of these characters. So it's a great way in order to mythologize your character. So what kind of looks do we get from these children of Luke?
Yeah, so we'll go through all of them,
Hmm.
but just the high points. We get some serious stories where there's one where R2D2 is captured by some droid slavers on the Outer Rim, and it's told from the perspective of a loader droid who has been fitted with a bolt that makes it want to abuse other droids against its programming, and it's how R2D2 tries to get the information that he needs, and then Luke arrives and rather than just slice all the droids open, realizes that they're being compelled and frees all the droids from their programming using by deactivating all the restraining bolts after R2D2 tells him how. And so and then the droids all focus on Luke's artificial hand and like, he's a Jedi, but he's also part droid and he understands us. So he becomes something of a savior figure to this group of droids as well, which is a very interesting, gave more personhood to droids than you normally expect. We get a story where there's a conspiracy theorist in Star Wars talking about how Luke was just a charlatan, with his old Ben was just this or old Benno, or she has a bunch of nicknames for all the characters and just thinks they're all a bunch of fakes. You know, the Death Star was never real, and
It's our
um,
Star Wars flat earther.
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
But Luke is listening to her in a bar, in a cantina, like bearded, and so we listen to this conspiracy theorist talk about how everything that Luke did was fake and a lie. As they get more and more drunk, and Luke is just amused the whole time, while one of the other witnessing patrons realizes who Luke is, and he just is like, "Is that all true?" And he's like, "From a certain point of view." Probably one of the most serious ones we get is set. It's not made clear if it's after the Battle of Jakku or another battle, but where an Imperial officer gets shot down in an escape pod and is dying in a wasteland, and a stranger happens by who is not an Imperial and saves him. You know, binds his broken legs and drags him across the desert to the closest settlement. And then when the Star Destroyer that crashed explodes, sending like a sea of molten glass across. He uses the Force to stop it from consuming this whole settlement, and then helps everyone escape, including setting a beacon so the Imperial can be rescued by his own people rather than killed by the rebels, because that was his request. And the Imperial the whole time is wondering when he realizes who Luke is at one point, and is wondering when is this bloodthirsty mass murderer going to get around to killing me. Blew up the Death Star, and Luke just heals him, saves him, and we get his confused perspective. But then we learn later on that the Imperial was, interrogated and tortured because they didn't believe his story, and he just remembers, he was so insistent on going back to the Empire that then does not believe him.
That's a shame.
We get a funny story that's from the perspective of a tiny sentient flea, the lubrious mote that lives on Salacious B. Crumb, who is the Kalukian monkey that is Jabba the Hutt's pet. So
it's that one, right?
Yeah, please never do that again.
Was it too good or not good enough?
It was in the uncanny valley, almost good enough. Yeah, so we learn that there's an intelligent mote that lives on that guy, but realizes that then ends up landing on Leia's ear and helping her arrange the escape and the murder of Jabba. So
sure.
So it's all these different stories told by Luke Skywalker, sort of his legend and his myth, from savior to part droid to conspiracy theorist con man to powerful Jedi. And this is where we also get the story told of how he is eaten by an exogorth with another scientist, and together they journey into the center of the exogorth to find the force sensitive individuals that Luke was searching for as ancient pre-Jedi sages, and how they help them escape
from the inside of the exogorth.
Correct.
Okay.
And I would say that the highest quality stories in this collection have been made into a manga of the same name.
Oh.
So if you'd like to see all this visually, including the explosion of a Star Destroyer and the way that Luke frees all these droids, it's also depicted visually.
I think that this is a great way to lead up to the portrayal of Luke in The Last Jedi. If you watch our episode on Luke, is it the mentor on the mountaintop? The man on the mountaintop? He's on a mountain in our episode title.
If you'd like to know more, you can go listen to episode 11, Luke Skywalker, the Traumatized Teacher.
Thank you. I thought we had something about a mountain, but I must be mistaken. To have this character who should be just set up as this Ubermensch and then show them as just a human is so refreshing. It's this idea that you can have a hero, but it's not like the vision of what a hero might be, but it's the actions that they do that cause him to be heroic, and that is what Luke ultimately went out doing.
Yeah, so The Legend of Luke Skywalker is sort of this Rashomon-style look at Luke's life from a variety of perspectives, and I think his character needed the fleshing out, as well as some other works like Shadow of the Sith also show him at his height of his power as a Jedi Master. So I appreciate anything that provides us more Luke, even if it's from a variety of different perspectives.
Mm-hmm. Because that's probably best than having... I've, chirped so many times about give us the cartoon show or the TV show set between Return of the Jedi and A Force Awakens, but sometimes it's better to just have those stories remain in the audience's imagination. It helps them, make the character more grandiose in a way.
Yeah, this I like this. It's not filling in any gaps of where was Luke during this exact event. That's myths about him that are set in undetermined periods where he met certain individuals and made impacts on their life, positive and negative.
And then it makes it all the more impactful when we see what he's really like in The Last Jedi, which I say is fantastic. It is one of those elements in The Last Jedi that I think worked so well, and we'll talk about some of the elements that didn't work so well with our next novel installment. But before we get ahead of ourselves, how would you say this stands as a piece of media?
So, as a piece of Star Wars media expanding on the universe, this is all about Luke Skywalker. You get some more about droids. You get some more about how some other world building about exogorths and Force sages. So, but it's all through the lens of Luke. So, seeing this character from different perspectives and seeing how people mythologize him is the main draw here. If you don't know who Luke Skywalker is as a character, you're probably not going to read this. But if you are like, man, Luke was my favorite part of the original trilogy, and I want more about Luke. Well, here you go. And this bridges the gap, sort of, to show, him at his height of his power before Kylo Ren took it all away. So I would, it doesn't necessarily do any like world building that you didn't already have, but it does do a lot of character work for Luke. So I would recommend it from that sense for any Star Wars fan who really likes Luke Skywalker. And as a piece of independent media, as I said, not all the stories are like 100% like this is my favorite thing in the world. Especially like the one about the moat and the one about the conspiracy theorist was a little on the nose for me, a little bit meta. The one about the droids was probably the most individual, like well written and interesting one, as is the journey into the Exogorth. So I like all those, and the one about saving the crashed Imperial is haunting. Seeing this destroyed wreckage and then the explosion and the bare survival of the few other people on the planet, but they're of varying quality. So it's each individual story has you have to be taken by itself, but then as a whole, you would decide for yourself whether it's greater than the sum of its parts.
And for the first time, we might say pick up the manga instead.
Yes, that cuts out the weakest of the couple of the I'll be kind, but a couple of the less directly applicable stories and all the ones that can be visually depicted. Go ahead and check out the manga if you'd like.
Excellent. So now on to the. I'll ask you right now: does Canto Bight make Canto Bight any more appetizing?
I wanted the Canto Bight from this novel to be the Canto Bight we saw in the movie. So this next book that we are looking at is called just Canto Bight. It is another short story compilation, but this one is it's 4 vignettes really about 4 different individuals in Canto Bight, and you get the sense that Canto Bight is an awful place. It is, racked with indentured servitude, glitzy lights, espionage, murder, betrayal, high stakes gambling, races, desperation. But it did it in an interesting way. It's like Las Vegas meets Singapore meets like Tortuga from the Pirates of the Caribbean, and it could be an interesting place. And the main character, especially one of these stories, a alien masseur turned unwilling spy, who has to use his pheromones and his connections to try to save his adopted human daughter.
Those character archetypes that they just always fall back on.
Yeah, the alien masseur spy, which original if nothing else. So then you get the competing spies all trying to steal different information in a nightclub. So I won't. This is one where the work it was leading up to did not live up to what it was promised. Kind of like Phasma did, but to an even greater degree. Because the Canto Bight we get depicted in The Last Jedi is more of a metaphor than an actual place. I compare this to how like the traditions of the planet of Ferrix are shown in Andor, or how we see Ryloth in the Clone Wars. You get the sense that this is a place with its own culture. And this novel does the best to do that for Canto Bight, between people who are in debt, how it's sort of hyper-capitalism, given leering monument Las Vegas style, under the control of powerful money men who you never really even see. But there's also humanity to it. There's a desperate gambler who just managed to find meaning in his life again. There's a man with an adopted daughter who manages to save her. There's these small human victories scattered throughout the monolithic financial empire that has consumed this whole planet. Certainly, even the novel is a critique of unregulated capitalist society. as is depicted in The Last Jedi, but we don't get something as on the nose as a fathier race through the casino,
Hmm.
destroying all of them, the craps tables, for example.
It's almost as if the media machine anticipated what some of the more contentious elements of The Last Jedi were, because I'm a fan of Luke's portrayal. You're a fan of Luke's portrayal. Not a lot of people are. Not a lot of people like Canto Bight. And so in the lead up to The Last Jedi, we have some pieces of media trying to flesh out Luke's mythology and Canto Bight as an environment. So, uh, and with Phasma as well, it's almost as if they anticipated some of the critiques and tried to supplement that and bolster that with expanded media. It's like Ryan Johnson, why didn't you use Phasma more?
Yeah, like they released all this media expanding on the characters you were using,
Hmm.
and I don't blame Rian Johnson for everything that wasn't perfect about The
Hmm.
Last Jedi, but I definitely think he had his own vision, and there was no one else to tell him. It's like, hey, could you include these story beats, or there's this other media. He's like, I got my own vision of what Canto Bight is.
Hmm.
Um,
Fathier races and cleavage aliens.
and that's you can have family races and cleavage aliens, but
Yeah.
give us some more nuanced critique than
Hmm.
they're just selling to both sides arm dealers. I'm like, you got to have more nuance to that
Hmm.
about a financial machine supporting a perpetual war state.
Yeah.
You can critique that too, but you can trust your audience a little bit,
Hmm.
and either they're going to not get it or they're going to feel insulted. And I felt insulted.
Yeah. So it's not as deftly handled. So back to critiquing the book rather than the film. So set aside that it may not have been reflected so well in The Last Jedi, how does this stand as a reading experience?
So it's not a comfortable read. This is not a happy place for any of our characters. If you're looking for like some fun escapism, skip Canto Bight. Canto Bight is a claustrophobic, horrible, horrifying, glitzy place. It is a monument to man and alien sins. But it is also tense in a way that Star Wars doesn't do thriller a
Hmm.
lot, and there's this thriller edge to it. In at least a couple of the stories where we have spies competing for information. Um, we have a gambler who's desperate to win enough money to pay off the Hutts by the end of a day, and just sort of latches onto this mythological like sense of luck as he tries to survive, and it just goes from there. So if you want to see where Legends of Luke Skywalker looked at an individual from several lenses, this looks at a place
Hmm.
from the lens of a new arrival, from the lens of a spy, from the lens of a local who's being eaten up by the machine, to the lens of a jaded gambler who never thought he'd stay here so long.
So this really sounds like it'd be for fans of Andor who enjoy sort of a multifaceted view of an environment, a point of time, and not have it so plugged into the Star Wars universe while still playing around in that sandbox.
Yeah, it's this little insular community. If you like gambling stories and sort of like this, it's almost there's a noir element here, certainly, especially in the story about the Masseur, is it Masseur?
I think it's Masur.
Masseur turned spy,
Yeah.
Masseuse, whatever. Uh,
Masseuse.
Masseuse,
Yeah.
yeah,
Methuselah.
yeah, turned spy.
Methuselah is a very old masseuse.
Yeah, but as a piece of fiction, um, again, the stories vary in, like, I would say, traditional short story quality. They have to kind of be taken as a whole, as like different facets of this flawed evil gem, I would say. So if you want to get a better take on the Canto Bight from what we saw in The Last Jedi, and want to get a deep dive into a Star Wars culture on a particular planet, and like, what does a whole planet casino look like? Well, the answer is like,
Awful.
it's awful. You don't want to live there. Some people think they want to live there and they don't.
Hmm.
So, but you want to see how people try to escape or try to survive? Go ahead and give it a read.
All right, so kind of not the most integral. Maybe it would have been if Canto Bight was served better in film, but that leaves us with our last novel to spotlight today.
Yeah. So our last one after Canto Bight is the last novel released in the lead up to The Last Jedi, and that is Cobalt Squadron. Cobalt Squadron is the squadron of bombers that we see at the beginning of The Last Jedi that destroy the Dreadnought at the expense of the lives of most people in the squadron, leads to Poe Dameron's demotion due to his lack of intelligent use of resources. So this is the most military of the novels, other than perhaps Inferno Squadron we talked about today. It is so it investigates the acquisition of these bombers and then the missions that they are assigned to help certain planets survive, escape from, or give supplies to the resistance in opposition to the First Order.
I don't know if we mentioned this much in our StarCraft spaceship episode, but I love these bombers. Uh, I was not sold on The Last Jedi in the opening minutes where we had a Your Mama joke open our tension, but seeing these ships come in that looked like they were some relics of Return of the Jedi that were just never put on film, seeing the way they operated, just had me excited.
Yeah, and we live on these bombers for most of the novel. With the squadron, we see Rose working on a signal scrambler on them, showing her ingenuity to try to hide them from First Order scanners. We get to know Paige a little bit better, as she's the more daring and less nervous of the sisters. We see their tension from where they grew up, and now it was been destroyed by the First Order. We see them, the day job of the resistance, and they're going undercover with these bombers in ice cracking mining while rotating secretly some of the bombers out to go on missions for Leia. So it's a sign of how people joined the resistance, how the resistance managed supply lines, and sort of if you want like a fighter jockey bomber story about these close knit crews who might die in the next page, go ahead and give this one a read. It's a relatively quick read, not particularly long, but it also was the only work that expands upon the character of Paige Tico. We get a little bit more of Rose in a couple other novels that came after The Last Jedi, but this is the novel that really focuses on the sisters, and really helps do their character justice. Um, More so than Poe Dameron's time with the Kimiji Spice Runners. This one is showing how a whole planet can just be casually destroyed by the First Order in the same way that the Empire would, and how that then radicalizes people against them.
I was going to ask you how well it serves Rose because, again, like Phasma, like Canto Bight, like the Luke Skywalker novel, this is leading to a decisive element of The Last Jedi, which is the character of Rose Tico, who, I mean, if you want to look at how to introduce a new character into an established universe, look at Yoda, and look at Lando Calrissian, and look at Rose Tico, and compare
Yeah,
writing styles, deftness, uh, some mystique. She's very much her heart's not on her sleeve. The writer's heart is in her mouth.
yeah. I don't
And
blame the
yeah,
character of Rose Tico for the
mm-mm.
actions the writers of Rose Tico made her do.
It's all in
Um,
the writing. It's all in how just blunt and on the nose all of her lines are, especially when they're on Canto Bight and why they fight the war. And
yeah,
it's just,
I wanted to see
ugh.
like skilled hacker and nervous, reluctant warrior Rose Tico from this novel, who was still willing to make sacrifices, more so than the mouthpiece for the writers that we got from Rose Tico in The Last Jedi.
Yeah,
And I'm sad that she was demoted to sort of barely above an extra by the time of
mm,
The Rise of Skywalker, though that's probably due to the feud between J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson more than anything else. He's like, how dare you introduce a character I didn't introduce?
right.
She is now has 4 lines. Um,
Yeah, Mary from Lord of the Rings has more lines than her in The Rise of Skywalker. Um, but yeah, yeah, I don't know. It's in the writing. Uh, Again, nothing that the actress did, nothing that the character did. I would have loved to have a human hacker because we've never had that in Star Wars. That's what a droid is. But if you have,
well, look, they're called slicers. They're everywhere in Star Wars.
yeah, but it's in a we don't see that in big character roles.
True. Yes,
Yeah.
having a slicer that's not played by, um, well, there's DJ, the slicer. That's the guy they free from the prison cell. He's a
So, like I
slicer.
said, they haven't had a major character,
Yeah,
the well-strong character.
yeah. Rose is not.
Yeah.
She's more an engineer
Mhm.
than a slicer. But yeah, it would have been nice to
Yeah.
see. But then again, we have Ray, who's already a scrapper. So give her her own sort of
Sure.
um, like niche to fill. I didn't need a romantic subplot with Finn because I want more romantic subplots between Finn and Poe.
Yes, please.
I wanted Rose to have her own thing. Maybe like Poe's already doing the pilot thing,
Hmm.
but you can certainly make her the engineer. And the the,
I'll tell you what she was
the
going to
Star
do.
Fortress bombers are
Yeah.
so cool. Do more with
Hmm.
them.
No, we're going to wipe them all out. Uh, what Rose was supposed to do in Colin Trevorrow's script was to hack an old Republic transmitter in the heart of Coruscant. Finn gets her in there, and it would have set out this huge transmission of Leia all across the galaxy. Because at this time the First Orders put a clamp on all communications. So she hacks into Old Republic technology to send this mission of hope, mirroring A New Hope and Leia's transmission that started it all, with this final transmission that gets the all of the denizens of the galaxy united against the First
Yeah,
Order.
I'm not sure I'd love that either, but it would have been more for her character to do.
It would
So
have given her more to do at the very least. So, anyway,
so going
this is
back
a
to
book.
back to the novel of Cobalt Squadron, the
This is
novel
good.
the novel is good. So, and I would recommend it for anyone who wants to see more like the Star Fortress bombers. They're the main focus of the
Mhm.
novel. You want to see more about. You want to see tense supply runs, engineering ingenuity, world building. Go ahead and read it. And if you want to feel a little bit sad about how Rose Tico was treated in The Last Jedi, read this because she's a much better character. She's still an
Mhm.
anxious young woman who makes bad decisions, but that's believable. So
Yeah. So in today's viewing, I would say Leia stands out for sure. I've never thought I would say I would like to read a YA novel like again in my lifetime, but that sounds quite compelling. Phasma sounds quite strong. The Legends of Luke Skywalker is one I'd like to visit. Uh, any other highlights that I'm missing that you would recommend to our lovely audience?
yeah, I think I provided like there's any of these novels could be appropriate for someone.
Mhm.
So go ahead and give them a read if you'd like. Hope we provided an overview of which ones you might prefer and provided some information on um, to at least understand where these novels are coming from if you don't decide to read them.
And the next time that we discuss books, we'll be picking up with the lead into Solo.
That will likely be in season 2. So thank you so much for listening today to our novel review part 5. Let us know what you think of these novels if you've read them on our subreddit, reddit.com/r/talking Star Wars.
Until then.